Hey gamers, how's it going? Daybreaker Rein coming at you through your video scope with just another gaming rant. And this is something that I'm actually surprised I haven't touched on already, considering how recent it is. But I figured I'd go ahead and get my 2 cents out there on the matter because I am a pretty big fan of the series. So, for those of you who aren't aware and haven't been keeping up with any sort of gaming media or news, there is currently in development an animated Castlevania series being developed and produced for Netflix. And the developer of this is Adi Shankar. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. This is the guy who, for those of you who don't know, did that really dark, gritty Power Rangers short film flick that got a lot of controversy. And I know that like Saban and Jason David Frank came out and like put him on blast and everything for that. But we'll get back into that and here in a minute. So I think it's no surprise that, or no secret in any case, that I am a huge Castlevania fan. And to kind of hone in on this point, not trying to brag and not trying to be like, oh, hey, look, at this. But here's a picture real quick of my physical Castlevania collection. And currently, there are only 2 games out of that collection missing. And mind you, these are the North American releases of these games. I don't have any of the Japanese releases, so Rondo of Blood and the Saturn version of Symphony are not 2 that are currently on the list to get. I'll probably get those in the grand scheme of things somewhere down the line. But the North American games I am missing is Lords of Shadow Mirror of Fate on 3DS, Lords of Shadow 2 for either PS3 or Xbox 360, but considering I have the first one on 360, I'll probably end up getting it on 360. Castlevania Chronicles for PS1, which I do have digitally on PS3, but I don't count digital. Digital is more or less just a way to play it, considering it is kind of pricey. And of course, the Super Nintendo Dracula X, which is probably in the same vein of prices as Rondo of Blood and the Saturn version of Symphony. It's very pricey, it's hard to get a hold of, and it's just something that's just not been in my budget. With that being said, I would like to go ahead and throw out that I am not a fan of the Lords of Shadow games by any means. I was extremely dissatisfied with the direction that they took with the Lords of Shadow games. I tried to give Mirror of Fate the benefit of the doubt when I got the digital version via the Castlevania Lords of Shadow Collection on 360. And I played about the first hour of it, and I just absolutely could not get behind it. I didn't like it. I didn't like the portrayal of Simon Belmont. And I think really my biggest problem comes from the absolute trashing that they did to the lore. And I think any Castlevania fan would agree with me on that matter. I absolutely hate what they did to the lore. And to be perfectly honest, I would much rather play, considering I have it, Castlevania Judgment than have to sit through and play through the Lords of Shadow games. That's not to say that I'm not going to eventually pick them up just to complete the collection for the ones that I'm missing, but they are definitely games that I do not hold in high regard. I absolutely hate what they did to the story. Now, with that all being said, so this Adi Shankar guy, he did the Power Rangers, the Edgelord edition of Power Rangers. Me personally, I just was not a fan of it. I don't like the idea of taking something like I get the idea of where he was coming from with that per se. I just wasn't a fan of it, and I just was like, whatever, freaking okay. Let's turn something that again, I get where the idea of how dark it actually could be comes from, but Mighty Morphin Power Rangers is kind of like a big thing in my childhood. So I guess it's just kind of that nostalgia that it's really hard to impress me with something of it. Like, I'm not even really interested in the new movie. But regardless, this isn't about Power Rangers. This is about Castlevania. So apparently this dude has some animated stuff, and he's kind of known for doing these sort of dark storylines, which me personally, I feel that would be okay for Castlevania. I'm not against the idea of a somewhat darker toned, and according to what they're saying, extremely violent version of Castlevania. I'm a fan of somewhat really violent animes like Samurai Champloo. The Samurai Champloo has tons of violence in it, as well as some of those older animes like Ghost in the Shell and Armitage the Third. You know, stuff that does like a lot of the notable stuff that has a lot of blood and gore and dismemberment. You know, that I'm not overly against. Hell, I fucking played Splatterhouse, so I'm not no, overly against the idea of this. Castlevania has had some dark themes. It's always kind of had not in the same vein that I think Demon's Crest captured. It's never been truly like that kind of really creepy atmosphere. But it has had some sort of dark overtones, in at least in my opinion. Especially when it came to some of the graphical updates with some of the later iterations, like Aria of Sorrow, where there's just pools of blood that spew out of enemies when you hit them with certain weapons and such like that. So I wouldn't say that it's improbable, and I think that given this dude's track record, this Adi Sinkar dude, if I pronounced that wrong, I apologize. Shinkar, I think. Shinkar? I've only heard it a couple times, so, and I'm not really super familiar with this dude's work. I just learned a little bit more about him the other night via a podcast that I listened to. But given this dude's track record, I think it'll be okay in that department. Like, I don't mind the idea of a dark overtone. Now, where I'm starting to kind of hold my breath and reserve my judgment, because this can go a lot of ways. And mainly specifically, there is mountains of lore for the original games. Before the Lords of Shadow games, before Konami decided to put their heads up their asses and completely shit all over any hopes for a Castlevania game that followed in the already set and established storyline ever since Iga left. The idea of where this could go is what bugs me the most, because what story are they going to follow? There is the idea, of course, that they could develop their own new story. They could focus on a new Belmont. They could focus on a potentially new Hunter. It doesn't even necessarily have to be a Belmont, because there were a couple instances where it wasn't a Belmont that you play as, such as Castlevania Bloodlines, where you played as John Morrison, as well as Portrait of Ruin, playing as John Morrison's son. You could also play as Eric. I forget his last name, but he was not a Belmont. The whip went on to the Morrison family, and then eventually made its way back to the Belmont family. But then, of course, is Symphony, you play as Alucard. With Circle of the Moon, my all-time favorite Castlevania game, you played as Nathan Graves with just a hunter's whip. You didn't have the vampire killer. So there's that possibility. I would actually be in favor of that. There's also the possibility of where they could put it in the setting. It could take place in the early ages of like Crusaders and stuff like that, which I think would probably be the best way to go. But there is the potential that it could end up somewhere in modern times. I am not in favor of this. I would absolutely not watch it if it's in modern times. We've got Vampire the Masquerade via White Wolf for modern time vampires. And if you really want to get your fix on, you're not necessarily the hunter, but I take that back. We've even got Hunter the Reckoning, which I believe is set in modern times and your modern day vampire hunters. And there's a dime a dozen vampire movies about hunters that are set in modern times. So I don't think Castlevania needs to go there. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be like, oh, well, there's certain Castlevanias where they have technology how could they have technology like this in the 1500s? Like, notable example would be like the motorcycles that the skeletons ride in the N64 games, or the fact that there's a freaking Frankenstein monster with a fucking chainsaw hand. How would they have technology like that in the 1500s? And yada, yada, yada. So, I mean, modern themes, at least, are not unnatural to see in a Castlevania game. So while I'm against a setting of modern times, I can almost kind of guarantee that there's going to be some sort of weird, witty incarnation of a modern technology placed in an earlier time, if they choose to go an earlier time. So the setting is kind of I'm I'm leaning more towards an older time setting, if anything. Kind of go back to the roots of Castlevania, maybe a little bit more before the ridiculousness of it. And so this also brings about the question, if they do follow the story of any of the already established characters, who are they going to follow? I'm pretty sure a lot of us Castlevania fans would agree that Simon Belmont would probably be the better choice to follow. I mean, his story really has been beaten to death. We've had not only Castlevania 1 and Castlevania 2, Super Castlevania 4 is apparently supposed to be a reimagining of the first game, even though I kind of hold it differently. It's really weird because it's just how different Castlevania 4 is to Castlevania 1. And then there's, of course, also the Castlevania Chronicles games, which I mean are just they were the first game, the first Castlevania done in a different format, reimagined again, if you will. So Simon's story is nothing new, and for a lot of lore based, Simon is technically one of the more powerful Belmonts. I know that the only one I think in comparison power wise to how strong Simon actually was Richter. I don't even think Julius compares to Richter or Simon. Even though Julius is a badass character, don't get me wrong, I think Julius is cool, and especially in Harmony of Despair, how he played very similarly to how Simon did in Castlevania 4, with having the ability to do whip swinging. He has the ability to whip in all 8 directions, which is super cool. I'm glad that they actually gave that to a Belmont, even though I was super mad what they did with the Simon DLC, where it's just his freaking 8-bit sprite, of course, because that's the one that everybody knows. Like, oh, hey, you want to play as Simon in a game? Here. You know? So I guess that would probably be the safest route, I guess, would be to focus on Simon's story. There, of course, are other Belmonts. There's, of course, a plethora of other characters that they could focus on. And again, there's no set in stone thing that they're just going to follow something that's already been done. They could completely make their own new characters and just introduce us to an original cast, which I actually would be more in favor of. I feel that if it's more based on Castlevania than it is an actual retelling of something that we've already seen, I would hold that in a pretty high regard. Like, I think that would actually be a really neat idea, and that's kind of what I've wanted to see for a long time. You know, you hear about all these Castlevania remakes and everything like that these fan companies have been these fans and these companies have been trying to make that get cease and desisted. You know, I really would prefer to see original characters come out of these these reimaginings that so many people keep trying to do. So that's kind of where I stand on it. I think to basically summarize, because I've been talking quite a bit about this, I think to summarize, I am not against this idea. Now, being in a Netflix exclusive, yeah, I think it's kind of bullshit to hide it behind a paywall. I would like to see it maybe show up on like YouTube or something like that. Like, say what you will, but I will really give Rooster Teeth the benefit of the doubt for that, because Rooster Teeth, they do have their paid service. You get stuff a lot earlier, but it's only like a day earlier. If you go sign up a free account with Rooster Teeth, any new stuff that they post will be the following day after they post it for the paid subscribers, and then it's a week after for YouTube. So if they followed like a certain format like that, that would be really cool, but I don't know. Like, a lot of stuff is now going to where it's like, oh, it's an exclusive series, you can only watch it this way. And that's not to say that it isn't successful. I mean, obviously, Stranger Things and other of these exclusive series are doing rather well, so there's definitely a market for it. My biggest thing is just where they're going to go, and I certainly hope that the director is not looking to Lords of Shadow as source material, because I won't support it. I will tell you right now, here and now, I will not watch it if it follows anything that involves Lords of Shadow. And I know that sounds really fucking shallow. I don't even care if it's fucking good. Like, I really don't. I think with how much I have disdain for that series, it would be almost hypocritical of me to watch a series that is based off of it and say, "Oh yeah, it's really good." Like, I'm sorry, like there is just nothing on this planet that is going to get me to like the Lords of Shadow games. I tried, you've got to give me fucking credit for trying, because I really, really fucking tried to enjoy those games, but I fucking could not stomach it. Like, and if that makes me a shitty Castlevania fan, then that's fine. At least I wasn't the one sitting there saying that we needed a fucking pachinko machine. you know, getting us all fucking hyped, and then there was that, oh, Richter's got a combat cross. Oh my god, he's got a combat cross. Why does he have a combat cross? Like, oh man. If you like Lords of Shadow, more power to you. Let me just say that. If you actually find enjoyment in those games, fucking more power to you. I find enjoyment in the N64 games. I fucking love those games. I love the freaking PS2 games. I love all the Castlevania games except the Lords of Shadow games. Like, I take the bad with the good. Even Judgment. Even Judgment, to me, even though I don't really necessarily agree with the character designs, even though I think Cornell is pretty fucking badass as, like, Robot Wolf. That's pretty fucking dope if you really sit and think about it. Even though I didn't really care for how Simon looked like Light Yagami, and then freaking Shinoa looked like a nun for whatever fucking weird-ass reason. I find enjoyment in those games. It's not a overly bad game, really, in my opinion. And that's just my opinion. This is all just my opinion. Just please take it for what you will. Take it with a grain of salt. I'm not saying that this is the rules that, define a Castlevania fan. I mean, I've had arguments over the Lords of Shadow games. I've had arguments that there are those traditionalist Castlevania fans, if you will, who are like, oh, the fucking series went to shit after they started doing the Metroidvania style games. Like, they should have just stayed linear, even though it's like they tried to they remastered one of the linear Game Boy games, the Castlevania Adventure. It was remastered and put on the Wii Virtual Console. It was under Castlevania Adventure Rebirth. As far as my knowledge, that was the only way to get it, and I don't even know if you could still get it, but it was met with lackluster responses, because you have to remember, Symphony really was the pinnacle of that. I mean, a lot of people the whole thing was like Simon's Quest 2. Oh my god, Ego Raptor fucking said it's an awful game, but you know what? I've heard objective criticism, not only from him, but there was somebody else who looked at it from a very different perspective. And even the AVGN has really kind of changed his tone on how he views Castlevania 2. So without Castlevania 2, again, that was very experimental. Without that, we wouldn't have had Symphony. It would have stayed linear, and I don't think it would have kicked around as long as it has. Because much like with anything, you have to adapt with the times, and you have to bring something new to the table. That's why I just am blown away with like sports titles, and sometimes people who follow like the Dynasty Warrior games can like religiously. I don't necessarily know anybody who follows either of those religiously, but it's just like I have seen it where people will buy every new game that comes out, and even if it doesn't change anything. So I don't know. Again, this is all just the ramblings of a fan. I don't hold myself as like the pinnacle true fanboy. I don't hold myself as like the czar of the Castlevania realm. Like that is not it at all. So I really hope none of you feel that way about this. But I've talked fucking your ear off, so I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this shit up. So if the series has a brand new cast of characters and its setting is decent, even amongst the dark, gritty gore aspect that they're going to try to look into, I'm perfectly on board for it. Please don't follow Lords of Shadow. Whatever you fucking do, don't follow Lords of Shadow, because I really do want to have hope for this. I want to have something good for Castlevania, because Konami ain't fucking doing shit with it. They'd rather just pump out pachinko machines, giving us fucking false hopes that they're going to give us a new Castlevania game and actually give us something that we want. And that's why we have Bloodstained. Hopefully Bloodstained really does good, and it really, it's Iga after all. It's the guy who gave us a lot of the good Castlevania games. So Anyways, with that all being said, I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys heard me ramble for the 20 something minutes that I've been talking. I apologize if this sounds just fucking off the cuff. I mean, well, it is unscripted, so it's all just kind of like I'm just talking as it comes to my mind. So apologize if people don't really care for that style. I like to make these videos shorter, but when it's really something that I just want to talk about and not really do a script for, these videos go on forever. So anyways, guys, again, I appreciate if you heard me out. If you are a fan of the Lords of Shadow games, feel free to dislike after I said that I don't like them. If you have any thoughts and comments that you'd like to make in regards to your thoughts on the series and what direction it should go, feel free to leave a comment. Feel free to leave a like if you like what you heard and you agree with what I have to say. Other than that, guys, this has been Daybreaker Rein, and I will catch you all in the next one. Take it easy, guys.